So un momento, por favor. All right. It looks like we have a couple more, so that's good. Again, this is Tom Wenning. I'm with Oak Ridge National Laboratory. I'm the Student Activities Coordinator, and we're going to start up on our third IAC Student Collaboration webinar. We've had 2 of them already over the last several months. One with the University of Miami, and they were talking about how they go about metering and how they deploy their loggers and all that good stuff. Then we also had another webinar from some of our other friends. Somewhere I'm blanking right now, but today we have a great speaker lined up with University of Dayton, and they're going to talk about how they prepare for an assessment. And Dayton is very thorough with their preparation. So it's something hopefully many of you can learn from. As a couple forwards before we really jump into this webinar, if you have questions, we're going to handle this one of 2 ways. Either you can type them in to the chat box or the questions box, which is on the right side of the screen for most of you, or you can raise your hand and we can unmute you, and that way we can have a little bit of a dialogue. Alex is comfortable with both. So with that, I'm going to jump into my next slide here. All of you, you're all part of the IAC, so you know the gist of what's going on. But as a reference, you know, you're part of a national program, and one of the things that we try to do, and we do here, is try to cross all the part of the approach we use is the director's meeting. Another approach at student level, and this is, in my view, as an alumni of the program, it's a really strongly held view for that. It happens at the student level. Students talking to one another, figuring out how others are doing it, and how we can all do things better within the assessment center. So for several of our past webinars, we've had almost everyone represented from all the different universities. Today, it looks like we have quite a few represented, so hopefully this is going to continue going on into the future. Just a recap, this is supposed to promote discussion, communication, collaboration, so please, you know, ask questions, fire away, you know, because this is how we learn, this is how we get better, this is how we move forward. So the previous couple webinars, we've focused on operations practices, how others run their centers, and this one's going to be no different. But in the future, we also want to look at some other things, maybe some new technologies, or how people handle other, maybe not directly operations-related activities. But we'll get to that. But today, again, it's going to be on operations. How do you run an effective center? And so this is going to be an important and hopefully a pretty relevant topic for most of you today. If you have comments, if you have feedback on either today's or any of the past ones with Oregon or Miami, you know, we want to know. We want to hear that. And in addition to that, we also want to know from those of you that are interested in talking about what your center does. I know a couple things. I've talked to many centers, I've talked to many students, I've talked to many of the directors. I know some of the centers do some things a little bit better than others, but I don't know everything. I hardly know anything, really. But I want to know from you if there's something you guys do really well in your own respective centers. I want to know that way we can hopefully highlight that in a future webinar and share that with others. And so as one heads up, at the end of this webinar, you're going to get an automated message. Hopefully you're going to get it anyways. And it's going to have a couple questions. Please take the time, respond back to that. Let me know what's good, what's bad, what you want to see going forward. Okay? So with that, I'm going to stop talking for a little bit. I'm going to turn this control over to today's main event. Alex Brogan from the University of Dayton is going to talk about Dayton's approach to preparing for an assessment. UD is a very unique center in that they have a giant backlog of clients, and so that affords some unique capabilities and opportunities for working with clients to make sure that when you get to an assessment, you can really hit the ground running and provide a lot of value and make the most of everyone's time. So with that, Alex, I'm going to turn control over to you, and I'll let you run the program, okay? So you should be getting a dialog box.
Yep.
Take control.
All right. Thanks so much, Tom.
Okay, perfect. I see your screen, so you're good to go.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for taking the time to be involved in this discussion. I think this is really important, and I was really excited to do this. My co-lead, Vijay, and I actually got the opportunity to go to DC for one of the conferences and meet some of the lead students. And we had a lot of fun talking about our mutual problems in the IAC. So I'm really excited to talk to you today about the University of Dayton IAC's assessment preparation. As Tom said, if you have any questions throughout this, feel free to jump in and interject. I don't need to be talking for 30 straight minutes. So, and our contact information is on this slide, and as well as the last slide. So if at any time in the future something comes up that you have a question about, feel free to reach out to us. So I'm just going to start at step 1 of our preparation process. The first thing we do is send out a pre-assessment letter to any client that's interested. And before we put anyone on our schedule, we obtain the following information that's outlined in this letter. The first is 12 months of utility bills, electricity, natural gas, water and sewer, whatever is applicable to the facility. 12 months of production data, which is usually in pounds per month or pieces per month, depending on the type of facility, obviously. The third is electric and natural gas equipment, and the fourth is corporate data. So I'm going to actually show you one of those filled out. So we ask for this corporate data because you all know we have to put into Rutgers, and this way we save a little bit of time while we're at the facility, so we don't have to ask these questions. We already have this before we even go. And then I mentioned natural gas and electric equipment list, and that's what this looks like. So we get the type of equipment, quantity, rated power, and estimated operating hours per week before we even get there, and I'll show you what we use that for in just a little bit. So this slide is going to serve as a preparation checklist and also kind of an agenda for how the rest of this slideshow is going to look. There's 3 main parts to our baseline analysis report. The first is a full utility bill analysis. The second is a plant energy balance, which it has to do with the equipment list, and I'll definitely show you that later. And the third, and I think most important, is called our lean energy analysis. It's a statistical analysis that gives us a lot of information that we can use when we're there, and a lot of good questions to ask when we get there. And one of the important things that I think to tell you is that this creates the first portion of our entire final report. So before we even step foot on the facility, we have about 1/4 of our final report done. And I was going to show you what that looks like as well. As I mentioned, we have 3 parts. So the utility analysis, the plant energy balance, and the lean energy analysis. And you can see this is 32 pages, so it's a pretty good chunk of our report. I would say maybe 1/4. So it's kind of a little bit of weight off our shoulders to have that done and ready to go. So we print out copies of that baseline analysis report that I showed you, and we actually share that with the plant personnel as soon as we get to the facility. And we conduct what we call an opening meeting. We sit down for about an hour with any plant personnel that are interested and available to talk with us, and we go over the information that's in this packet. They took the time to provide us with all that information, so we want to show them what we did with it. And we create a PowerPoint as well, which is really similar to the one I'm going to show you today. And this helps us really effectively communicate what we found in their utility analysis. So we bring along a projector with the rest of our equipment. It's lucky there's about 6 or 7 of us to carry it all, and so that's what we do there. So go ahead and jump right into our baseline analysis. The first part, like I mentioned, is the utility analysis, and this is just a summary page. We obviously extract all this information from the utility bills. These are just all totals. I'm going to point out some important things that we take from this. The first is this pie graph right here. It's just a translation of these totals right here. But what we can tell from this is that 94% of their utility bills are going towards electricity. So we know if we go to the plant that electric equipment and electricity savings are what we're going to be focusing on. Another thing that we do is benchmark their utility costs against the last 25 industries that we've seen. This is, I think, more helpful to the client to see if they're, you know, within range of the market prices. They're not overpaying dramatically. And the third part I'm going to point out is that we show them their annual CO2 emissions, and we actually translate that into typical U.S. homes. So this facility emits the annual CO2 emissions are equivalent to 585 typical U.S. homes. And I think this really puts into perspective for them how much energy they're using, and it kind of tells them, for us, this is why we're here. We're not here just to save you money, you know, that we're really passionate about what we do. So I'm going to dive into the electricity stuff. The first thing that we do on the electricity side, and it's probably takes the longest time, is break down their electric rate structure. And the reason we do that is to identify marginal costs. So actually at the bottom of a lot of these slides you'll see this actionable info. And these are why we do all this stuff and what we get out of it. So just wanted to point that out real quick. So these marginal costs are the marginal costs that we use in our actual assessment recommendations. So for this facility, we'd use 5.23 cents per kilowatt hour instead of the 8.6 cents per kilowatt hour that you saw here. And that way we're ensuring that we're not overestimating savings. Same with demand, we get an accurate demand cost. And the other piece of actionable information that we get from this slide is at this point in the presentation we really slow down and take our time to explain what demand is to the plant personnel, how it's measured, how they're charged on it, and that way we can start a discussion about demand shift. Because you guys know our one-day assessments aren't enough for us to identify things like demand shift. So if we make sure that they understand this, we can start talking about it, they can point out equipment, and we can note that down for when we actually start our plant tour. We know exactly what we need to take measurements of and how to get an accurate AR. So there's one AR right there that we've got. And the AR is an assessment recommendation, by the way. That's what we call it. So next, looking at the trend of their electricity use, things we look for here, well, first of all, the blue bars are their on-peak demand, and the red line is their meter consumption in kWh per period. So what we look for here is any trends. There's a clear seasonal trend here, so what we'd ask them at this point is, do you have space cooling in the facility? And there's also a really baseline here. So we'd wonder, what's contributing to that baseline? What pieces of equipment are you leaving on? Things like that, lights left on. Other actionable information we can get from this is billing consolidation. So when we go through those utility bills, the electric bills, if they've given us multiple meters, we can say, hey, why don't you consider consolidating these? And we can actually have that calculation ready for that opening meeting before we even get to the facility. We can have it printed out in hand. Hey, you could save X amount of dollars by doing this. And a lot of the utilities, at least in our area, have started doing this virtually, which has been pretty low cost, just a low administrative fee. So that's one that we can just print out, show them right away, and there's a second recommendation. Another recommendation that we can print out and have in hand is install capacitors to correct power factor. So sometimes on the bill you have that information, sometimes you don't. But anytime we do have that information and we see a power factor below 0.9, we recommend installing capacitors and we do the calculation. Unfortunately, there hasn't been a lot of good payback, but we still do the calculation to learn from it and to show them that that information's out there. I'm going to move on to the electricity cost breakdown. This isn't something we show the plant personnel in the opening meeting. It is in our report. But what we're doing here is, since we broke down the electric rate structure, we're actually recalculating their bills and seeing how close we can get. So we have the billed cost and the calculated cost by us. and we take the percent difference. There's a couple of reasons we do that. The first is to see how close we're getting on our electric rate structure to make sure we're understanding how they're being billed. And on this one, we're within 5–6%. So we understand it. We have an accurate marginal cost, I would say. And the other piece of actionable information we can get is if there's any billing discrepancies. So really quickly to the eye, if any of these were outliers, like if one in the middle was 30%, we'd be able to go back and look at that bill and say, you know, something happened in this month, you should contact your utility company. So moving on to the natural gas use, again, here we look at the same thing. Hello?
Sorry, real quick question. Yeah, I want to ask, you know, we received a question, so I want to ask it now since it's semi-appropriate. One of the questions we received is if a company is not getting charged for a very poor power factor, will you still recommend that correction?
That's a great question. So if they don't have a clear power factor charge, it's usually embedded in the demand charge from what we've seen. So we can calculate it that way. But if there is absolutely no way that they're charged, then we won't.
Okay, perfect. And then as a clarification, you mentioned a couple times that you show up with some of these recommendations already. By that, do you mean you actually write up the full AR and you have something, you know, physically, here's part of the report for you? Is that what you mean? Or more just, we already found a recommendation and we're going to tell you about it with details?
Yep, we write it up completely as if it were going into the report. Sometimes it doesn't make it into the report if they're not, like, for example, capacitors. It's usually a 10 to 5-year payback. It'll go in as a comment, though. So it'll be part of the report, but it won't go into Rutgers.
Very good. Thank you. Keep going.
No problem. Okay. So for monthly natural gas use, we look for the same type of trends here. We see a seasonal trend. You know, so we'd say, okay, do you have space heating in the plant? And they'd confirm that. They have virtually no baseline here. One thing we would look for is these outliers, which is really nice in this kind of form to see what's going on. So we'd kind of point out, you know, in January of 2014, you used a lot more natural gas than the previous year. You know, what happened there? In this case, it was just a really, really harsh winter. So, but they could have, you know, added some new equipment or something that used natural gas that we'd want to be aware of. And then finally, we have water and sewer use. Water use is in the blue bars and sewer use is in the green bars. Here again, we're looking for any seasonal trends, usually indicative of cooling towers. A piece of actionable information that we see a lot is sewer exemption. So you can see that the water and sewer use is exactly the same. If we see on the equipment list that they have a cooling tower or anything that's evaporating water, we would have them apply for sewer exemption so that these would be different. In sewer exemption, if you're not familiar, you install a deduct meter at the sewer, and so it'll measure exactly how much is going out to the plant. So if they're bringing in this much water, but they're only sending out this much because some is evaporated, they won't get charged this. And typically the sewer use charge is higher, so it's usually pretty good savings at just the capital cost of a deduct meter. So that's, I think, the fourth AR that we've got before even stepping foot on the facility. The second portion of our baseline analysis is the plant energy balance. So what we do here is I showed you that equipment list, and we actually, I'm going to show you the, actual sheet that we use here. So what we do is we take the rated power that we got from the equipment list and estimate loads and efficiencies. We have the runtime that they gave us, and we calibrate this energy use to their total energy use, which we have. We have the actual total, and then we sum up our totals and try to see where the energy is going. This isn't an exact science, obviously, because there could be a lot of estimation in the information they gave us, and a lot of times we don't get a lot of good information. But this is a way for us to try to understand where the energy in the plant is going. So in this case, for electricity, 28% of the electricity is being used on the process heaters, 22% on HVAC, and 19% on process motors. So we might sit down and review this and say, let's focus on these 3 systems, let's everybody brush up on this, and be ready to ask questions once we see the rest of the equipment and what's going on in the process. So it just helps us focus before we get there on what we need to review. We do the same thing with natural gas because we have those totals in some equipment as well. This one obviously isn't as diverse as the electricity, but we definitely focus on HVAC in this case. So the third portion of our baseline analysis, which I think is the most important, is called our lean energy analysis. It was developed by our director, Dr. Kelly Kisk, and it uses the well-known principles of lean manufacturing. So it basically, the philosophy is that any energy that doesn't add value to the product or add value to the plant environment is wasted energy, or independent, quote unquote, is what we call it. So I'm actually going to go through that with you and show you what that looks like. Oops. So Energy Explorer is the software that we use for this statistical analysis. That was also developed by our director, Dr. Kelly Kisk. And the data files have to be in a special format in these notepads. So we have the weather usage that we're going to use in Energy Explorer, and we have the electricity consumption and the production in 1,000 units per month. So that's what we're going to upload into Energy Explorer here. So here's the weather data. I'm going to open the usage data and merge these files. So the first graph we would look at is a simple time series graph. So we have our electricity consumption in this dark line and outdoor air temperature in this dotted line. And what we're looking for here is any weather dependence. So if the outdoor air temperature goes up, does our electricity go up too? And there's sort of slight correlation. It's a little bit hard to tell. Another way we can look at this, though, is through an XY graph and a 3-parameter cooling fit. So when we apply that fitted line, what we're looking at here is electricity consumption versus outdoor air temperature. And anything under this flat line is energy that's independent of weather right now. So no matter what the outdoor air temperature is, they're always using about 500,000 kilowatt hours per month. And then as the air temperature starts to get higher, it gets hotter outside, they use a little bit more. And that would be due to air conditioning. And then at this temperature, we call the balance temperature, so at 33.05 degrees is when they start space conditioning. Now that's a really low balance temperature. We'd rather see something around 50 or 60. So we might go in and say, okay, what's going on here? Why is this balance temperature so low? Are you simultaneously heating and cooling? Is there a process that needs cooling all the time and this isn't really showing us what we need to know? What we do look at is the R-squared value. So an R-squared value tells us that 69% of the variability of these points can be explained by our model. So it's not the best, but it's pretty good. So we'd kind of go in asking that question. And this is a pretty big red flag for us that we'd take the time to look into while we're there. The next thing we want to look at is a time series of electricity and production. So we want to see, is the electricity dependent on their production at all? And here's the time series. So we have the dark line as electricity again, and the dotted line as production. And there's kind of a correlation. You know, as production goes up, we definitely want the electricity to go up. But the more important thing is when it goes down, we want it to go down the same slope, because any energy that is not going down is wasted. So, you know, there's a couple places we can see kind of weird correlations. Definitely right here is a good correlation, but we can look at that again a different way in an XY graph in a 2-parameter fit. There's definitely a positive correlation. The most ideal graph here would be starting at 0. So at 0 production, you have 0 energy use. That's obviously in a crazy ideal world, but that's what we'd want. And we'd want these lines to be really close to linear. But unfortunately, you know, some days they're using more energy but producing exactly the same. So what we can get from this is a lean energy breakdown. So I'm going to do a 3P multivariate regression with all three factors that we just talked about: electricity, outdoor air temperature, and production. And I'm going to run what we're calling our lean energy breakdown. And we see that from this breakdown, 71% of the energy is independent, 9% is weather dependent, and about 19.8% is production dependent. Now this is an R squared of 0.71, which is very high. We have pretty high confidence in this. And what we can get from that, or the way we can effectively communicate this to the plant personnel, is we can show them this nice red independent wasted energy right here. And we assign them an LEA score. So that's a sum of the weather dependent and the production dependent. They have a score of about 29. So when we get to this slide, what we'd say in the opening meeting is, all right, so almost 3/4 of your energy is wasted. It's not dependent on what or production. What is going on here? Are you leaving lights on when you leave the building when nobody's here? Are you leaving motors running during breaks or during off time? You know, what can we do to shrink this red portion? And this is probably the most fun part of the opening meeting, because the plant personnel just go at each other and they're like, I told you we should have done that. And it's really great. It's a great discussion that we have, and we really identify a lot of opportunities in this one slide and just in this analysis. So we do the same thing with natural gas. I can go through these really quickly. The time series graph of natural gas with weather, there's a very nice inverse correlation here. As obviously as outdoor air temperature goes up, we're using almost zero natural gas, which is a beautiful, beautiful graph right there. We can look at that again a different way in natural gas versus outdoor air temperature, and we see a change point temperature of about 49, which is a little bit better. Again, in an ideal world, this balanced point temperature and the cooling balanced point temperature would be equal. So, but here we see this low baseline, it's very nice, and then as the temperature goes down, they're using more natural gas to heat. So then we have variation of natural gas with production. Again, the dark line is natural gas and the dot is production. Really hard to tell. There's really nothing going on here. And again, this is natural gas versus production. It's obviously a negative slope, but only an R squared of 0.33, so there's not a lot of value in this graph. Just kind of gives us a general idea. The one thing we do different on natural gas is we calculate the normalized weather-dependent natural gas use. So trying to see how much natural gas use is going just towards weather dependence, just towards heating the facility. So that just uses their area. So this facility was using 46.1 MMBTU per year per 1,000 square feet. Oh gosh, sorry. Which is this score right here. The average over our last 25 was 60, so they're doing pretty good. From this breakdown, we see 16% of that was independent and 84% is weather dependent. So I'd say they're doing pretty good here. Natural gas isn't going to be our focus. And again, they have an R squared of 0.97, so we're pretty confident in this model. And just like the electricity, we can look at this again, like I said, 84% weather dependent and 16% independent, which gives them a score of 84, which is really great over the last 25. So we can kind of give them a pat on the back for natural gas and a slap on the hand for electricity, and then we can go out and do our work on the plant tour. So that's all I have for you guys, but I'm open for any questions. And again, contact information if you ever have any questions about this in the future. Always feel free to call our office.
All right, so excellent, Alex, excellent, good job. With that, anyone that's out there, anyone in Cyberland, if you have questions, again, one of two ways here. You can raise your hand, and we can try to unmute you and let you ask or talk for a little bit if you have comments. or there's a questions and or chat box off on the right side. So you can type your question in otherwise. So with that, I don't see anything coming in right now. But Alex, one question I had in regards to those scores, could you just step back and describe how or where that score comes from?
Sure. So this score is, I'm going to go to the electricity one, it's a little bit easier to see. This score is just an addition of the 20% and the 9% weather dependent and production dependent, and that came from our lean energy breakdown, which we did a 3P multivariate regression on the 3 factors that we were looking at, which was the electricity consumption, the production in 1,000 units per month, and outdoor air temperature. So this isn't the prettiest graph down here, so I usually just look up here, and we can see that the statistical analysis told us 71.2% is independent, 9% is weather dependent, and 19.8% is production dependent. So we just kind of make it a little bit prettier and put it in here. So this all comes from Energy Explorer.
Okay, gotcha.
And I should say,
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I just want to mention if anyone is interested in Energy Explorer, you can contact our director. It's available for purchase, and you get a discount because you're an IAC. So if you're interested in how this works or if you have questions about it, feel free to ask.
Okay, and so Alex, right now we have Jillian from the University of Syracuse University, and I'm going to try to unmute her, and we'll see how this goes. She has a couple questions.
Great.
So with that, Jillian, I think you're unmuted right now, so try asking your question. Jillian, are you there? All right, so Jillian, I don't hear you right now, so you might be muted. And so while you figure that out, I'm going to ask you another question here, Alex.
Sure.
What is the typical lead time? Sorry, let me restart. What is the typical lead time between when you get all the requested pre-assessment information from the plant and when you complete the pre-assessment analysis for these assessments? What's that lead time look like?
I'm going to make sure I understand. So you're asking how early do we get this done before we go to the facility?
Yeah, and then how long does it take you to do the analysis? So just kind of general time frames. Do you get the information a month ahead of time, a day ahead of time?
I would say about 2 weeks at a time is a pretty good average. We review it as a team together the Wednesday before each Friday audit. But this is something that we have our new IAC members start working on, so we give them a month out to start working on this and ask questions. This is one of the first things a new IAC member would work on, kind of a training tool, if you will. But if you've done a few of these, it usually doesn't take very long, maybe about a week, I would say.
Okay, very good. And let's see, Jillian, are you there?
Hi, Jillian.
Uh-oh, I still don't hear you. So I'm going to ask another question.
Okay.
Let's see here. For the production information that you use and that you were showing within your LEA analysis, are you able to get that production data prior to the assessment day?
Yep, definitely. They usually, a lot of facilities, if they're on top of it, they have that kind of spreadsheet already, in their files or somewhere on their server, and they just have to pull it up and send it to us. And a lot of times we get really big, crazy ones with each product name, and we just end up adding them all up and calling it pieces per month or pounds per month or something. But if the facility doesn't really keep track of that, which, I mean, you guys out there have probably been to all different kind of facilities just like I have. We just don't do that part of the LEA if we don't get that information.
So you'll still run an LEA analysis, but it'll just be with respect to weather dependency.
Right. Yeah, so I would say this is the most valuable graph on the weather side that we get. It tells us a lot about their weather dependence. So we'll definitely still run that and include that. And then once we get to the facility and see them in person, because, emailing and phone calls, it's a lot of tag, it's a lot of, timing stuff. And a lot of times the plant personnel are too busy to get everything before. So sometimes, not often, we don't like to do it, but sometimes they'll see how cool this is and they'll say, oh, if we get you production data real quick, can you include that? So, and we will. We'll do that. It's not my favorite thing to do afterwards. We'd like to have it ahead of time for the most value, but we definitely would do that.
Okay, excellent. So it looks like Jillian's maybe having a little bit of trouble with the microphone, so she's typing some of her questions in instead. So I'm going to start off with the first one received, and that is, let's see here. You mentioned earlier that you have a backlog of clients, but at least at Syracuse, and I know many other IACs as well, they are not quite as fortunate to have a nice long backlog. So some of the assessments, some of the clients they're receiving are last minute. Right. How would you suggest that other centers could benefit from your type of pre-assessment process, even if they have a shorter time period, even if they have that last minute client?
Okay. Good question, Jillian. Hi, by the way. I'm getting back to your email. I had the pleasure of meeting Jillian at the DC conference that I mentioned before. But I guess one of the most important things would be just to try to get the utility bills and just to see those, just to see this trend. Okay, what are we walking into? Do they have space cooling? Are we focusing, even just from these two graphs, you would be able to tell, okay, there's a really high baseline of electricity. They use a lot of electricity. Natural gas, not so much. So I guess, in a shorter time period, that would be, one of the quicker things you could do. Data entry off of utility bills obviously isn't a lot of fun, and it's not really a priority when you're last minute and crazy, like I know Jillian is. But I guess that's what I would say would have the most value from this extensive baseline in a short amount of time. Does that make sense, Jillian?
Okay, so she does have she said yes. So there is a follow-up question with the utility bills. You, in your presentation, you have 2 years shown.
Yeah.
Is that something you actually ask for from the clients, or do you typically just get a year?
We only ask for a year. It depends on, who's reading. I think our pre-assessment letter says, feel free to send us up to 2 years. We only need 1 year. But seeing 2 years is really nice to kind of see what happened year to year. To me, the more data, the better. So this is kind of a rarity, though. Yeah, we usually only get 1 year to look at.
Yeah, I can tell you're an engineer. The more data, the better. I love it. Okay, so one more question from Jillian, and then I'll ask one of the other ones. When you benchmark the facilities against each other, do you benchmark against facilities in the same NAICS code or SIC code, or is it just all of the industries that you visited?
That is a great question, and we only do the most recent 25. We've talked about doing industries because plant personnel have asked us that, but it just hasn't been a priority. We just haven't gotten there yet, and I don't know if it would have a lot more value. I think the size of the industry might be a little bit more. I might be mistaken by saying that, but no, we don't do that. We just do most recent.
Okay, the last 25, and that's it. Okay. Okay. All right, excellent. So let's move on here. We have another one from Hassan. and he's from the West Virginia University IAC. He's liking your presentation here, but he has a question about the electric bill. Sometimes at West Virginia they have difficulties collecting the exact bill from a company because of different meters, consumption, setup. So with that in mind, all these different pieces of data rolling in, how does that work with Energy Explorer?
So for Energy Explorer, what we would input is just the totals. So I totally feel you there. At West Virginia, we have that a lot. There's distribution, there's generation, there's multiple meters. What we'll do is just put that into our spreadsheet. This one didn't have multiple, but put them all here separately. Maybe put a line up here for which meter we're looking at, and then total it up at the end, and just show that. That's what we do. We just show the total electricity consumption and total electricity cost per month, and then that's what goes right here. That's what this middle column is. That would be the total. So Energy Explorer doesn't really care as much as it pains us to go through multiple utility, multiple meters. Energy Explorer just wants the total here.
Okay, excellent. And so along the same lines with Energy Explorer, in the LEA analysis, it breaks out the weather component, production component, and I think, Hassan, you're going to have to correct me if I'm stating this question wrong, but Alex, how does Energy Explorer measure that percentage breakdown with respect to the HVAC weather dependency?
That's a great question. So he's asking, how do we get these numbers? How does the statistical analysis work?
Hassan, if I'm wrong, please type in and I'm reading it wrong. But I think that's the question.
And that is a great question, and I wish I could answer it. It's some statistical analysis happening in here that is beyond my understanding right now. I'll have to dig into the coding that's in this program. But yeah. I'm guessing it has to do with, like I pointed out, the R-squareds of electricity versus temperature. So how much of the correlation can be predicted by just the electricity and temperature model, and then how much can be kind of the variation. So I think it's a lot like if you've ever used SPSS or any sort of statistical modeling software. They're looking at the correlation between each factor.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So Alex,
sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And Alex, I'm actually going to add in a little bit because I too have some experience with that stuff.
Great.
And for better or worse, Hassan, that breakdown comes from the coefficients that she's showing in there, and essentially it's an equation. That equation represents the consumption within a facility or a plant, and so each one of those factors in there, as you drive that energy equation using actual data, it'll give you a breakdown based on each one of those coefficients, and then that gives you the nice dotted lines, and at the end of the year you just formulate that into a percentage. So that's my take on it. But okay, it looks like, Hassan, you can type something in here. Go ahead, Alex.
Oh, is this what you're talking about? The equation that's shown at the top of Energy Explorer?
Yeah, that's the equation I was referring to. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the relationship between all of these factors. Definitely. I don't know where this is derived from though. So.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So it looks like I may have been a little bit off on my question. Hassan typed something in. He said there's a percentage breakdown of electricity consumption by different equipment, and he's interested to know how you get those breakdowns. So, Hassan, my apologies. Alex, if you could address that.
All right, sure. So we looked at that. So since we have, if you remember, I showed, nope, not that, sorry, got lots of things up. I showed the list that the facility gives us. So they tell us what they have, how much they have. They give us the rated power if they have it, and then operating hours per week. So that's really all the information we need, with a few assumptions about average load and efficiency. We can get an average power draw from that piece of equipment. So that's just the quantity times the power times the load divided by the efficiency. And then we have the runtime hours, which would give us kWh per year. Then this total is just, or this fraction, I'm sorry, is just the ratio of this energy usage over the total energy usage. And then with the cost that you saw before, the 8.6 cents per kWh, we calculate estimated cost per year. Again, I mentioned this isn't really an exact science. This is just to try to give us an idea. So we would see that support equipment in this case was 14% of their total energy use. Does that help us on? That was a much easier question than the first one.
I think that was it. So yeah, and Hassan just sent another comment in. That was it. That was it. The second time was the charm, obviously.
Great.
Okay. All right. So I'm not seeing many more questions. So we'll give it another minute or two to see if again, if folks have questions, raise your hand, type them in, send up a smoke signal if needed. You know. We'll give it another minute or two. Okay. And actually, while we wait to see if there are any questions, I'm curious and interested to see the report that you show up with. And you mentioned this presentation is another factor that you show up with to that to the meetings, the morning of the assessment. You have an actual printed report along with these slides.
Yep.
I'm really interested to see that real quick, or if you could.
Right. Yeah, so this is what it looks like. We have the corporate data, which was from that pre-assessment letter that I showed you, the one that was filled out, just to kind of have at our leisure. Again, this just goes into Rutgers. You all know the pain. So we have it right there, ready to go. And then here's the utility analysis you saw. I'm missing a graph. There it is. And then their current electric rate structure, which you saw directly onto the PowerPoint. Again, these are looking a little bit familiar. This is just the information that's reading from this. So this is all the information straight from the bill. And then we also calculate load factor to see how many shifts they have a day. So a high load factor indicates 3 shifts in this case, and then a low would indicate 1 maybe, depending. And we try to match that up with that corporate data that you saw. So they told us they had 3 shifts a day, 6 days a week, 49 weeks a year, and that matches up pretty nicely. And then we have just a breakdown of their electricity charges and the percent difference that I showed you. This is one thing that we do as well. From 12 months up, we would subtract the percent difference from 12 months ago to today, and we would be able to tell that overall the electricity costs increased by 1% in the past 12 months. That's a really low one, especially lately. We've seen them really high, and that's something we'll point out and say, hey, your electric rate structure way up because of this rider. Did you know that? Were you alerted of that? You know, you might want to look into that, kind of pay attention to your bills a little bit more. We have the same thing for natural gas and water. In this case, they had sewer exemption, so that's what that looks like. Just a summary of the marginal cost, like I mentioned before. And then you guys saw this plant energy balance. And then our lean energy analysis. The data set that you saw on the notepad. It's just a little bit cleaned up. And then we have all of the information from the Energy Explorer outputs that I showed you. And then their LEA score. We show this in this one, which is from that 3P multivariate. I don't think this clearly communicates what's going on, so that's why we also show this thing and assign a score kind of as a motor, if you will. We have the same thing for natural gas. And then one of the last things that we usually ask for is a plant map. We usually don't really push for it if it doesn't get emailed. We just, get one when we get there. Just a little bit helpful when you're going through these huge plants, or even if they're small, it gets a little confusing. And so we try to mark where we are. It doesn't always work. I'm particularly bad at directions, but it's there for reference. And that's it. That's our report. You guys saw most of it in the PowerPoint, so.
Excellent. Okay, so it looks like we have one more question, and then we'll wrap things up. So our last question is from Lee McNorton from the University of Alabama, and they were wondering if it's mandatory for companies to send their equipment information prior to the assessment, or if you'll still go in without having that requested information. At least at Alabama, they have some issues trying to get that equipment list for the facility prior to going.
Yes, I agree. It's sometimes hard, especially if the facility doesn't have a record of that and they don't have the time to go out and look. So yeah, we'll definitely do this without any of these pieces. Really, what we say if a facility is really struggling, the bare minimum we need is the utility bills, and we still do a really good analysis for you because we have the lean energy analysis and we have our temperature data. So they wouldn't be they'd be missing a valuable portion, but we can still go in with a lot of actionable information. So yeah, we'll definitely still do it. It's just really nice to have, which I'm sure you agree with, Lee.
All right, so it looks like that's the end of the questions I've received. So, Alex, I'm going to steal the presentation rights back. And
Great.
One of the questions that we did receive that did come in was whether the slides would be available, and the answer is yes. So right now, we are posting all of our information, all of the past recordings and slides are being posted on this IAC forum website. Hopefully everyone's familiar with it. There's a Rutgers database, and then we also have this IAC forum website. And so all of you should be hopefully registered in here somewhere. If you're not, get familiar with it. So right now we are posting these things. There's this nice little toolbar up top, and if you look under resources and then in our reading room, we have the past recordings listed under the student-to-student interactions. Going forward, once we're at a critical mass, we're going to pop this out and we'll put it somewhere where it's a little easier to find. But for the time being, here they are. We'll add Alex's presentation recording to this soon, and then going forward, hopefully we just keep adding on. But if you haven't had a chance, go to the IAC forum, poke around. If you're looking for jobs, we have a jobs board and everything else. So that's where they're at right now. The slides and everything will be available. So with that, let's see. Looks like we might have had one more question. No, it's just a thank you. Okay, so a couple closing remarks and a heads up for going forward here. So Alex, good job. If for some of you, if there are additional questions, obviously Alex and the folks at UD are more than willing to talk with people offline. But another option is our LinkedIn IAC group. I know many of you are on that platform already. We do have a discussion group on there, so that's an opportunity to pose questions, to get feedback from other IAC students and alumni. We have the IAC forum, which that has a bunch of things, a calendar of upcoming events. It has the recordings. It has the jobs board, so check that out if you're not. Like I said, most of you should be familiar. There's a student registry. Make sure that as lead students, you have the correct information in it for all of your centers. This is important data for DOE to be able to track the performance, the progress of all of the centers. So this is important stuff, so make sure you go in there. Most of you should have seen an announcement for the student certificates. I'll probably send out one more reminder, but applications are due here in March. For those of you that are graduating, or if you have individuals within your centers that will be graduating in May, they can request one now, or they can request another one after they graduate. We do send out updates if you end up going on a couple of assessments after the fact. So there's that. And now looking forward, we have our next webinar already scheduled, and it's going to be our friend Jillian, who's asking all those great questions. She's going to be talking from Syracuse University's perspective. The main topic will be on training new IAC students. Syracuse does a great job of bringing new students into the center, training them up quickly. So that's going to be the main focus, but she may also talk about a couple other things. So it'll be good. I'll be sending out a reminder soon, or a registration link soon, but for the time being, it's set for March 24th, Tuesday at 3 p.m. So with that, we're done for today. Alex, again, thank you for this webinar. I think it was really useful, really insightful. Hopefully others on the line learned quite a bit from it. This recording will be posted on the IAC forum website for those of you that want to re-watch it or have someone else in your center watch it. And if you have questions, comments, again, you're going to hopefully get a feedback form, so please put in some comments and questions, fill out that feedback form, and we look forward to talking to you all next month. So thank you everyone in Cyberland, and thank you, Alex, for the presentation.
Thanks, Tom.
All right, take care.